Hi everyone, it's Emily, and I replayed A Link to the Past, my childhood favorite game, right after beating The Adventures of Elliot. And I kind of wanted to make this side-by-side comparison because while these two games have similarities, which was kind of what drew me to The Adventures of Elliot initially, there are quite a number of differences that stood out to me. And so I just wanted to share my experience with both, and having played them back-to-back, what my thoughts are. So I first want to thank Square Enix for providing a review code for The Adventures of Elliot. This was one of my most anticipated games of the year, mostly because when I saw the trailers, I couldn't help but think, is this going to be the next Link to the Past? In recent years, the Zelda franchise definitely has focused its efforts more on the open world, sandbox-like experience rather than the classic dungeon linear adventure experience. And I won't lie, I kind of missed it. And so when the trailers dropped for The Adventures of Elliot, I couldn't help but think, oh my gosh, are we going to get an HD 2D Zelda-like game? And I was super excited, especially with the time travel aspect, which of course led me to think of the traveling between the light and dark world of A Link to the Past. So I was very much excited for this game. So in today's video, I just want to compare and contrast A Link to the Past and The Adventures of Elliot and sort of resolve my feelings around both. Is A Link to the Past still one of my favorite games of all time? And did The Adventures of Elliot live up to my rather high expectations before playing? So first I want to break down the graphics. I think this is one of the obvious things, is that The Adventures of Elliot is beautiful. I think Team Asano does a good job by trying to differentiate all of the franchises they've worked on in the HD 2D style, making sure it doesn't look too stale. Every franchise, I think, has their own unique twist. For example, Star Ocean Second Story R looks much different than Octopath Traveler. Same could be said with The Adventures of Elliot. While it does look like the more kind of traditional Octopath-y HD 2D look, but I think the sprites they use just looks a little bit more defined and helps differentiate it from the previous HD 2D games. But with all that said, A Link to the Past also looks great. I think the use of color is both vibrant in the light world and muted in the dark world to really, resonate the differences between the two places. And the pixels are classic. What can I say? Is this nostalgia speaking? Maybe, but I did replay the SNES version of A Link to the Past most recently on stream. Previously, I had only played the GBA version. On the emulated SNES NSO version of A Link to the Past, I think it still holds up graphically. Is it as pretty as the Adventures of Elliot? No, but it doesn't need to be. I think, classic Zelda has a classic Zelda feel to it. If this game was redone in an HD 2D style, would it look cool? Yes, but it still wouldn't be the same. But again, this might be just nostalgia speaking. I really enjoy the look of A Link to the Past, and I wouldn't really want to change it. None of the sprites or the environments or the color usage, I think it's great as it is. Another obvious comparison you can make are the items and weapons that you find in both games. The Adventures of Elliot definitely wears its inspiration to Zelda on its nose with the weapons and items, like the bombs or the boomerang, as well as the bottles that you could put potions inside to heal yourself. So a lot of inspiration there, and also the kind of upgrade path. So The Adventures of Elliot, you really can only upgrade your weapons if you find them in treasure chests. But in A Link to the Past, some items can be upgraded through treasure chests, but most of them are upgraded using the people that you encounter and talk to. So whether it's the blacksmith that helps enhance your sword, or the flying bat that halves your magic usage cost, thinking that he's cursing you, but really he's helping you out. So all those sort of things, I think, definitely lends to its comparison. But what Adventures of Elliot does further is they kind of introduce a magicite, a nod to Final Fantasy, in trying to also add another dimension to upgrading your weapons and the combat. So this was sort of, I thought, a strange way to go about the upgrades by introducing a gacha system, where you basically transfer all the fragments that you've collected on your adventures to this mysterious guy, who then will give you a chance to upgrade an ability that you can add to a box, and thus making your weapons more powerful in some way. So all the different magicites I thought was a nice way to add a different dimension to the combat, and also makes it a little bit more RPG-like, in that the more enemies you take down, the more fragments you gather and collect, you could then have a higher chance for gaining better powers to level up your weapons through those means. And that element definitely makes the Adventures of Elliot more of an RPG, where you have to go and seek the upgrades out rather than gain them through grinding or experience of taking down enemies. So I think that was one way Adventures of Elliot definitely tried to stay more faithful to, Square Enix's RPG roots. Did I really enjoy the gacha system? Not really. I think it was definitely easy to utilize. I didn't feel like it was as brutal as, say, Xenoblade Chronicle 2's gacha system with their core crystal and pulling weapons. It was much more fair in that you're probably going to get some good upgrades to enhance your weapons. And by the end of the game, you probably will have all the available upgrades if you were able to, slay various enemies throughout the game and collect those fragments. On that note, there was something I did not necessarily enjoy in the Adventures of Elliot regarding the magicite, and that was how if you already owned a magicite and you happened to find that ability in a chest, instead of exchanging you for something worthwhile, they'll just give you one fragment. And one fragment is like the equivalent to 1 out of 5 that you need for the chance for a pull. So they basically just gave you the lowest reward possible in the game if you had already owned or found that enhancement previously. And I guess the same thing could be said about A Link to the Past. Because of the rupees cap, you can't get over 999 rupees in your inventory. I definitely wasted a lot of chests where I would open them up and like, oh, that was rupees I could have added if I had spent them already. So that was definitely a flaw in my playthrough of A Link to the Past most recently, that I was like, they could have done this differently. But hey, maybe the Adventures of Elliot was trying to echo that same feeling of, oh, you're already too powerful, you don't need more stuff from these chests. And so they give you something that's worthless. But the sense of exploration is what really, I think, captures the heart of a Zelda-like experience, especially in A Link to the Past. And that was something that I was really looking forward to with the Adventures of Elliot, and how time travel is going to be incorporated so that you can revisit the same areas and maybe change things like you could do in A Link to the Past with the Light World and Dark World. But while I was playing the Adventures of Elliot, I really did enjoy going out and filling in the map to kind of see what was going on and all the sights. And of course, the environments were beautiful because of the HD 2D, and it was definitely well crafted in that way. But I think the thing that disappointed me the most about the Adventures of Elliot was how they handled the time travel and the different timelines that you go across. It wasn't really like A Link to the Past that I was hoping, where if you made changes to the past, it would have repercussions, or rather change things in the present/future. It of course does that for the overall story, because you basically go to the past so that you save the world. But there wasn't really any environmental changes, and so that was my biggest disappointment. And I was hoping we would see more of that. Kind of like, in Chrono Trigger, when if you gave up a chest and didn't go for it in the past, but waited for the future, you ended up with an upgraded item. I was kind of hoping something like that would play out. But I think because of how the Adventures of Elliot was structured, where you kept kind of descending in timelines rather than going to the past and kind of jumping through different areas of time, there was less of a chance to really make environmental changes to the present, because you had already, at that point in time, explored most of the present. So whenever you go to the past, you'd have to blow up the same boulder that you did in the present. And it was, I think, definitely a disappointment with how the structure was and how time travel was handled in that way. So I may have made some unfair expectations to the Adventures of Elliot in this regard, because if you look at The Link to the Past, since replaying it, I kind of came to the realization that there wasn't too many environmental changes you really make between the light and dark world. And so it's not necessarily you're making environmental changes from the light and dark world, it was just you were able to make advancements because you gained some tools and you could go a little bit further as you navigate both worlds at the same time. So I think eliminating the scope that the Link to the Past did compared to the Adventures of Elliot, where the Adventures of Elliot, there are 4 different layers you can enter that of the same maps and the same dungeons and everything, whereas the Link to the Past just keeps it to 2. I think there was a lot more opportunity to really play around with, you made some progress in here, let's go back to this other world and see what progress you can make now that you've made those kind of changes, or you found that item, so you can make advancements later on. Or you can use your mirror and teleport back to the light world after you made some advancements in the dark world. So I think that interactivity was really done well in Link to the Past, and something that was not quite as well captured in the Adventures of Elliot. But it's possible that they weren't really trying to emulate that at all. I just had that unfair expectation going in. But I kind of wish, because of the repetitiveness of the Adventures of Elliot, they didn't have 4 different eras that you could be transported to. There are some cool things, of course, to see how the environments change, between the different eras, and how technology was advanced and then collapsed and then came back. That was definitely cool to see in the environments and the different areas that was there. It just wasn't as interactive, I think, as I wanted it to be. And all the repetitive dungeons where you basically go through the same dungeon once again, maybe there's a little bit of a change, like there's different enemies this time around, or this one has a treasure chest here now. It really wasn't that different. It was basically frame to frame, the same sort of architecture that you're going through once again. I didn't feel that way at all with A Link to the Past. It didn't feel repetitive going between the light and dark world, because they really did change what either the dungeons look like or what the areas looked like, making it a lot more satisfying to go back and forth between. But I think despite the flaws to the adventure and the exploration, which I think a lot of people like The Link to the Past because of those aspects, the Adventures of Elliot does a good job at differentiating itself by really focusing in on the characters and the story. So you don't have a silent protagonist with Elliot. He's actually quite a stylish little guy who has a nice personality and is very pleasant to talk to all the NPCs with and see how he reacts back and forth with them. And having more side quests that help kind of flesh out the world, where you get to meet some of the NPCs and learn a little bit more about them, as well as the other characters you meet along the way. I think the Adventures of Elliot did a much better job with that compared to The Link to the Past, but The Link to the Past wasn't really set out to be that sort of game. So what I'm trying to say is it's not really a flaw that The Link to the Past doesn't have a huge story with, a talkative NPC or anything. That wasn't really the focus of the game. And so I think my initial comparison between the two, after playing them back to back, helped me appreciate those differences and what makes those two games very unique and different from one another. So more so, A Link to the Past, it's all about the exploration and, finding those little secrets and feeling very powerful once you take down the bosses and make progress. Whereas The Adventures of Elliot, I think the most satisfying thing for me was definitely getting those little tidbits of the story and all those little character interactions in, of course, a beautiful world with the HD 2D graphics that really sold it for me, I think, towards the end looking back. But I think one of the major flaws of The Adventure of Elliot, despite, a lot of the great groundwork with the story and the characters, was the pacing. You really don't get the big payoffs to the story or the character development until you reach the third ending. Once you get to the first ending, which is called the bronze ending, I felt so unsatisfied. I was like, oh, that's it for this game? I know there's more, but how much more is there? What could they really enhance the story to make it interesting? Thankfully, the silver and then, of course, the gold made it all worthwhile. That part of the game, I beat The Adventures of Elliot in about 17 hours, I would say. So the meat of the story and the character growth was really in the last 2 hours. So the first 15 hours, I felt it was more of like a serviceable game. It was kind of cool to explore, a little bit repetitive with the pacing, of course. But there was a linear story, and I was hoping with the new timeline you'd explore, there'll be something really cool and some cool secrets. And while there was some cool aspects to it, it kind of dragged a little bit. Especially after how incredible the prologue was with the demo. or rather the demo prologue. I think there are 2 demos, so the second demo was what really sold me on the game. But playing the game for, I think, the meat of like the 10 hours in the center, it all felt a little bit samey, unfortunately. But I think it's definitely worthwhile to push through and get to the end, because there were so many great, I think, revelations that they pieced together finally at the end that made the story definitely very satisfying and worth playing through. So I think definitely the pacing of The Adventures of Elliot was the biggest flaw. With the high highs of the prologue, the kind of stagnant center or middle of the game, and then the high highs at the end. I think there might be some players who just kind of stop midway through, or they stop at the first ending and just think, it's not worth going through 2 more endings. Because unfortunately with the last 2 endings, you kind of need a guide if you want to streamline, finding the true ending of the game. Otherwise, you're kind of just bumbling around and, again, feeling that sort of stagnation that could feel a little bit drawn out, I think, for some players. The Link to the Past, though, I think has pretty great pacing. I don't think there was ever a dull moment when I was playing that, and I think that's partly because of the design. I think the design of the exploration, like despite not having much of a story or much interaction with characters at all, with dialogue, the pacing of all the little discoveries you make and all the little dungeons that you conquer was really masterclass for the time, and definitely still holds up today. If you look at the length of the games, I want to say, Link to the Past in about 15 hours. I forget, but whatever the stream tax was, let's say about 15 hours. And then Adventures of Elliot was 17 hours, so 2 hours longer. But I think I was mostly or more engaged in that 15 hours to Link to the Past than I was with The Adventures of Elliot. I think definitely my opinion of The Adventures of Elliot would have been much more elevated, especially while I was playing it, if the pacing was much better in the meat of the game. So taking, I think, more inspiration from A Link to the Past would probably have benefited, where the different timelines you go into and everything was more interactive and less you kind of, let's do one timeline and then let's kind of do it again. Just however many years in the past, we'll do the same map again. And I'd like to take the time to thank all of my channel members who help make videos like these and my live streams possible. And a huge shout out to all of my Orbit Architect level members: Trin, Night Noctum, Just Another Joe, Dan, Scott Healy, Osman, Joe, Champagne Sherpa, Skylet Sane, I am Aki, John, Heidi, Glenevere, and George. Thank you so much for all your support. But overall, I'm really glad I played these games back to back, so I could really kind of have my feelings about The Adventures of Elliot as well as The Link to the Past a little bit more solidified. So with The Adventures of Elliot, I'm glad I played it, but it doesn't live up to kind of my S-tier anticipation I had placed on it earlier this year. I think it's a great B kind of tier experience. I enjoyed it a lot. It's just, I think the pacing kind of didn't make it as enjoyable as it could have been. So is A Link to the Past one of my, if not my favorite game of all time still? I think replaying it definitely helped me remember a lot of things about the game. When I was on stream, there were so many things I forgot, and it's kind of funny looking back that how many things I forgot, and I was like, oh no, I'm kind of bumbling around here, guys. I'm sorry. While I was playing it on stream. But I think despite all that and my kind of loose memory of how the experience was when I played it back in the day, I still think it's an amazing game. It's a classic for a reason. I do think the design choices with the pacing as well as the dungeon design and the puzzles I didn't even get to the puzzles with Adventures of Elliot. The Adventures of Elliot puzzles were there. They weren't that interesting. They were easy to do. No really true head scratchers. Whereas A Link to the Past, there were some that were very well designed that did make you think a little bit. I want to say there was a couple that it took me a little bit to remember how to do. But despite all that, I do think A Link to the Past still holds up today and is still probably one of my favorite games of all time. Is it my favorite game of all time? I don't know. It's so hard for me to answer that question these days because there's so many great games out there, both games I played in the past as well as the games I've been playing recently with recency bias. So it's hard to say is it my definitive favorite game of all time, but I think it's still up there. I still think it's an unforgettable experience, despite me forgetting things while staring at it. But unforgettable of the feeling you have when you play it and when you finally beat it. It's something that it hasn't really, for me at least, been recaptured in another Zelda-like game. The Adventures of Elliot, I think, did a good job at, again, kind of evoking some of those things or elements from a traditional Zelda-like game, but infusing its own. I would see a sequel to The Adventures of Elliot, you know, if there's ever one, like a spiritual successor or something. I think that could be really cool because usually Team Asano does a really good job with their sequels. They kind of learn the mistakes from the first game and are able to implement it in a sequel. So I think that would be really cool, and I would be looking forward to that if they were to do it. But still, A Link to the Past is still, I think, the gold standard of that sort of experience that, again, just hasn't really been recaptured for me in another game. So I'm really glad I was able to play both of these games back to back and be able to think about them in these sort of aspects. Love to hear what you guys think. Do you love A Link to the Past? Do you love The Adventures of Elliot? Have you played both of them? And have you played both of them recently? Love to hear what your guys' thoughts are on both of them. Do we share similar feelings about either or both experiences? Or do you have different thoughts on them? I'd love to hear. And I guess until my next video, bye everyone.